Hi, I'm Lilly Hubbard and I am a Jesus lover living in Thailand, but today I am in France, in Paris. And today I'm going to tell you the story about how I was an exchange student at 17 years old. I always wanted to learn French. I always had a desire to be bilingual. And I knew I wouldn't be able to learn in the area that I lived in. I lived in a small country town where they didn't have a good French program. So my mom, because of the help of my mom, she found an exchange program and signed me up for it. And it would be my senior year of high school. There was a lot of issues happening in my family at that time. My mom and George, they were going through a really difficult financial situation because my dad was continuously suing my mom, saying that she was an unfit mother, bringing her to court. They lost a lot of money fighting these unnecessary lawsuits, and my dad never worked to try to really support our family. He had a lot of issues. So my parents had to move from the town that I was living in, and they moved to Florida. This happened just a few months before I was supposed to go to France. So they left, and I stayed in the same town with my dad, and I started partying a lot and I became like a party girl, nearly 17. I had my own car. I had a lot of freedom, and I knew I was going to be this exchange student where my whole life would change. So I went to Florida to prepare myself to be an exchange student. And then my dad decided he was going to not sign the papers to allow me to go be an exchange student because he wanted to see my sister Chloe, and he made it a real problem for me to go, and it was very upsetting. And I remember just crying to him, and finally he apologized and signed the papers to let me go, but it caused me to go a few weeks late, so I kind of missed the introduction because there was supposed to be a couple-day introduction, I guess, in Paris, where they were going to prepare you for the challenges of being an exchange student. So I missed that, and my parents, Mom and George, had to go to Las Vegas, and it ended up being that Marcy, my older sister, drove me to the airport to go to France. And I was so nervous. I remember actually having a horrible dream before I left, and on the way to the airport, Marcy, she was so she had no idea what I was going through. She's like, "Oh, you want to go get lunch on the way there?" And I was thinking, "No, I'm not hungry at all." I felt like at that moment I was thinking, I know what it's like for somebody on death row who has their last meal and they say they normally don't even eat it because you know you're gonna die. That's how I felt. I had no appetite at all, and if you know me, I love food. It's hard for me not to have an appetite. So I get to the airport. This was September 10th, 2001. Fly from Florida to Dulles to Paris. And on the way to Paris, that was an 8-hour flight. I was so scared. I was so nervous. I didn't once get up to go to the bathroom. 8 hours. I don't even know why. I really don't know why I didn't get up to go to the bathroom. But when I got off the plane, the first thing I did was go to the bathroom, and I peed for so long. So I go through the baggage, I get my bags, and it was like this, at that time it was like a terminal that was in a circle, and I get my bags and I'm like, okay, where is the person supposed to meet me? Because there's supposed to be a person meeting me, and there was nobody there. And I start crying, I start freaking out, having a nervous breakdown. I remember finding, I guess, a payphone, calling my mom, calling 911, and then some French person answers. Then I figured out how to call my mom. She's in Las Vegas. Then she puts me in contact with Marcy. And finally they tell me just walk through, and I walk through the exit. And then there's this guy standing there waving me. And he was like, "Why? What's the problem? I've been here. Why didn't you just come out?" So it was this really good-looking French guy, but he was a little bit arrogant. And I really didn't know how to speak French that well because I didn't have a good French program. And I remember saying, "Oh yeah, I love French crepes." And he was like, "Oh, French people, we don't even eat crepes. That's what Americans think we eat." He put me on the train, and they sent me to Bretagne to live in the countryside. I'm gonna meet my French family. I arrive at my destination after about 2 or 3 hours, and the host mother and the daughter are there to greet me. And you could tell they're so nervous. I'm so nervous. I'm sitting in the back of the car, and we get to the house, and the host father, he's so friendly. He kisses me on the cheek, and they live in this beautiful country home. Very, very beautiful home. Very large, especially for French standards. So it was the mother and the father, and they have a 16-year-old daughter, and I'm 17, so I'm a year older than her. And then they have a lady named, I don't know if I should say like their names, but let's call her Nancy. Let's just call her Nancy. And she was really sweet. She had been the nanny to my host sister since she was a young girl, and she kind of stayed with the family, and she would help cook and clean, and she also worked part-time. And the mother and father were managers of different department stores, and they worked really hard. They worked long hours. So Nancy would kind of ran the house, all the cleaning, all the cooking. So I arrived at my host family's home. I went to sleep because I was exhausted. Thankfully, the bed was so comfortable. And the next thing I know, it's time to wake up. 6 o'clock in the morning, it's dark out, wake me up, knock, 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 time to go to school. They sent me to school, and I was so tired. I was falling asleep in class, which I've never done that before in my life. And I got through the school, and then the nanny, her name's Nancy, she came to pick me up. She picked me up in the car, and she kept telling me, "Atanta, atanta." I was like, "What? Atanta?" I don't know what this word means. And she kept trying to explain it to me, and I speak very minimal French. She brings me back to the house, and she sits me down in the living room. She turns the TV on, and it shows New York City and the planes hitting the World Trade Center. And I didn't understand what was going on. They looked up Atanta, the translation of that in English, and that meant terrorist attack. And they were just showing me the news. It's all in French. I don't understand anything. They told me to call my family. I tried calling my family, and for 3 days I couldn't get in contact with anyone. And at that time, my sister was in Florida. Marcy was in Florida. She was watching, I guess, Chloe and Robbie. They were younger. And George and my mom were in Las Vegas for a business trip. And the first person I got a hold of was Marcy. And she'd been watching the news. And at that time, I guess the worst case scenarios were being put on the news. So much fear from the mainstream media about to beware of terrorist attacks coming against schools, against hospitals. I don't even remember what, but I was terrified. I was so worried about my family. And I remember they held a candle vigil at the church, at the cathedral, at the school. And it was so strange because that whole year I missed out on an experience that my country had gone through, 9/11, and I had so much fear for my family's safety. I remember having such vivid bad dreams. I've dreamt of just being trapped in a house where there's all these rooms and I couldn't get out, and I had extreme anxiety because of that. And at that time, there was no cell phones. At that time, the exchange student organization told us not to talk to our parents often. We should only be talking to them at most once every 2 months, and I couldn't do that. I think I was talking to them once a week. The weird thing about the 9/11 situation was that I had flown through Dulles Airport the same day that the terrorist attacks had flown in. Pretty much. I flew out September 10th, and I guess I arrived September 11th. And then it happened. But so I think the reason why they wanted to host an exchange student was to help their daughter, who was an only child, to give her a friend and to help her learn English better. But she and I were like oil and water. I was more mature because, I had been living kind of like a party lifestyle. I drove my own car. She was much more sheltered. She was much more type A personality. And we did not get along. We were not friends at all. And there became this dynamic that evolved where the father was very inappropriate with me, very flirtatious. He would always come over and kiss my cheeks and tell me how beautiful I am. And he would always call me, tu es coquette. I ended up naming my restaurant in New Orleans Coquette. And coquette means a woman who flirts without the intention of following through. So it was a kind of inappropriate thing to say. And when you put this in perspective of his wife, she had had cancer a few years before, and she had breast cancer, and she only had one breast. And he had made some comments before about their intimacy or lack thereof intimacy that made everyone, when he would say this, everyone was uncomfortable. So you could tell that there was some tension there in the family. And the nanny, Nancy, she was kind of like the neutral person between us, because it was kind of like me and the father, because he was my ally, and then it became my host sister and her mom, and they were a team, and then Nancy was in between. And Nancy would always pick us up from school, and she would help us with our homework, and after she helped us with our homework, she would cook the dinner, and I would watch her cook. I was crazy about watching her cook this dinners and learning how to cook French food. You know, I love cooking, I love food, and that was probably the highlight of every day, watching her cook dinner. Okay, I know I'm in a different dress in a different location, but since I recorded that story, there was more that I needed to process, and I want to go back about my issues with food, because ever since I was a really young girl, I've had issues with food. I started dieting when I was 10 years old, or maybe 11. And I just always hated my body. I've never felt like I was ever thin enough. Really bad body image. And being in France, where the culture's different, like everything is controlled. Like we had breakfast, we had lunch, and we had dinner, and there's no snacking, and you always eat together, which I love. I love that about French culture, but that was so different from what I was used to, where in America, like, my parents worked really hard. We didn't always sit down for dinner, and I could always, like, after school, just go in the refrigerator, grab what I wanted. I had complete control. And it was like the lack of control there that was so crushing on me because of the 9/11 situation. Like, I think I can't really explain to you, but I basically went through 9/11, the trauma, completely on my own, without anyone to talk to about it too. Because when I would talk to my parents about it, my family, I would, on the phone, I would say what's happening, and then they would tell me the news, and then I would just have to process that internally. So I felt so much fear, anxiety, and such a lack of control, and then that manifested into a pretty bad eating disorder, and I became really bulimic when I was there. And I would like steal food. I would overeat in the morning when I did have time to eat by myself. I would go buy candy bars at the school. I remember buying a candy bar. They had a vending machine and buying a candy bar at the school. And my host sister saw me, and she looked at me and gave me this look like disgust and shock. Like, how could you do that? And I felt like, oh, like, okay, that's not like appropriate. That's not something I'm supposed to be doing. And yeah, and the bulimia like got pretty bad. I'm not going to go into all the details about it, but I tried to hide it. There came a point where we were talking at the table, and Nancy was telling us about her friend whose daughter was suffering from bulimia really bad. And I was like, oh, how do they know she's bulimic? And my host sister looked at me and she was like, Lily, when someone's bulimic, everybody knows about it. And when she said that, it was like so much shame, like such shame on me. Like, I knew it wasn't a secret. Like, that everybody knew about it, and they just didn't confront me on it. But the positive to that was, after that, I never did that again. I completely stopped. So sometimes, like, getting a harsh word, getting the truth slammed in your face is the best thing you can do for a person, because that really actually blessed me. I felt so much loneliness. The first couple months were so much bliss, and then you go through the culture shock and the loneliness and the depression, and I felt like I didn't belong. And we would have a couple week breaks from school, and I didn't have any freedom. I was in this country home. I didn't have a car or any way of mobility, and I would lock myself in my room all day and just read in English, which wasn't really good for my French, and I think my host family thought I was a little weird. And also, like, the inappropriateness of the father towards me, like, it was pretty bad, because even there was like a organization there, like a guy there that also hosted exchange students, and he hosted, my best friend was this Swedish girl. She stayed with him, and she told him about it because she had come and stayed with us for a couple of weeks in Paris. We went on a trip to Paris, and so she had told this man who kind of ran the organization, and she told him about the inappropriateness. And he like came up to me and said, Lily, I'm really sorry that like this is like, I know it's not easy. And I just brushed it off. I was like, no, nothing is bad. Everything's fine. Everything's okay. Because the host father was my only ally. He's the one that like, I felt like was on my side. And I felt like the host mother and the host sister were not on my side. So one of the worst times there for me was Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, because in America I would be partying with my friends, having fun, and instead I was home with my host sister because Nancy went out with her friends, and the host mother and father, they went out to a big elaborate French dinner. And my host sister had a few of her friends over, and she did this dinner out in the garage, and they played like pop French music, and they didn't drink, and they just had fun and partied like, really young children kind of. And I was used to partying hard like a party girl, and I just felt like, wow, these people they're so uncool. I know that's really not a nice thing to say, but I just felt so much older and more mature and like so different than them, and I didn't want anything to do with them. And so I ended up breaking into my family's liquor cabinet and drinking all these cordials and getting so drunk off creme de menthe and being locked in my room drunk by myself, crying and being so hungover the next morning. And my host sister, she had to clean up all of her party. Like her friends stayed all night long, left early in the morning, and yeah, I didn't help her clean up at all. And she was so angry about that. But at the same time, I didn't really participate. But I probably should have helped her clean up. I was just really, really hungover. There was one day that I was there by myself, and my host mother was calling. She started calling me, and I always had a fear. I've had a fear from my whole life of answering the phones because of trauma of my past. When I was young, we had bill collectors calling our house, and we were not allowed to answer the phone. And we had criminals calling because my dad was doing illegal activity, and they were making death threats on our voice machines. And there was just a lot of trauma there about answering the phone. And so I never answered the phone. But then there was one day came where I was there by myself. The host mother was calling me all day. The phone was ringing. I remember hiding up in my room and just trying to block out the sound of the ringing. And she came home, and she was so angry at me, and she was so just disgusted. Like, why wouldn't you answer the phone? I've been trying to call you all day. I was so worried about you. And I was just like, I don't know. I was scared. I was just scared. That's all I could communicate with her. But the best part of the whole experience, there were many good parts. My French family did treat me well in so many ways, and they gave me a beautiful bedroom, and it was really nice. And so on Sundays when we would sit down and eat dinners together, and there were a lot of good times, even though right in this video I'm talking about a lot of the difficulties. But one of the best times I had was going to the Pyrenees with a sports group. And it was my friend Ava, my Swedish friend, who arranged it that I would come too, because she really wanted to go. And I wasn't in the sports group, but I got to go too. And we both were skiers. And it was about 20 of us. And we stayed in this hostel. And we went skiing every day for a week. And it was so much fun. And it was such a break from, from just being in that house, And when I bought a postcard and I mailed it to my French family, but it didn't get back. And it didn't get there until after I'd come back. And I got picked up from school, and Nancy was like, Lily, why didn't you call us when you arrived? Marie, the host mother is so angry at you for not calling and not letting us know that you arrived safely. And I just honestly didn't know that I was supposed to call. I just didn't think about it. And maybe it was the issues that I had with phone, like calling and phones or whatever. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I like apologized when I got back, and I had such a fear of like disappointing people and letting people down. But the postcard did come a couple days later, so they did see that I did send a postcard. Lord Jesus, give me the words to talk. Give me the words to say what I need to say. But coming out of that, getting through the winter time and into the springtime, you know, I had this determination to learn French. And I remember during the study break time during school, I would sit and learn or sit and study on my own and just practice French. And I said, I knew if I can't come here for a year and I go back not speaking French, I will have completely failed. So I was so determined to learning the language. And there were a lot of great moments, a lot of highs. But I think it was during that time where I realized like I did have a very unhealthy obsession with drinking, because I wasn't allowed to drink there, but they did have on every Sunday, they would do a special Sunday dinner, and they would pour champagne and they would allow me to have one glass of champagne. I remember like being obsessed with getting this one glass of champagne, and I always knew deep down that that wasn't normal. And later on in my life, I fell into alcoholism, and it's been a struggle my entire life until the last few years, where I don't drink at all anymore. So that's my experience as an exchange student, and I wouldn't change anything for the world. I'm so glad I did it. It helped build character in me. It strengthened me. It gave me a break from maybe some dark things that I would have experienced if I had stayed in the United States, because I had two other friends. One of them fell so deep into drugs that she's passed away. So I'm blessed that I had that experience, despite how difficult it was. I was telling my mom about some of these things, and I guess she had never heard of me talking about it, and she's like, oh, I guess I shouldn't have let you go. And I said, no, of course I had to go. Of course it's helped make me who I am today. And I've been able to make friends with people in the French community on my island of Koh Samui in Thailand. And yeah, it's opened up so many opportunities for me. And it shows, I think, that like, you know, you think you know somebody, and you think, you know, you might get angry about how somebody reacts to something, but there could be a whole thing going on that you have no idea about. And this French family, they never knew the trauma that I went through. I didn't even know how to express it to anyone. I never talked about it to anyone. I always kept it secret inside me. And I haven't really ever been able to talk about it until I found God, until I gave my life to Jesus and I was born again, and he cleared me of all of those regrets, because I was holding on to so many regrets that I didn't even realize I was holding on to. And it feels good talking this out and telling you and sharing this story. And I hope it blesses you. I hope somebody hears this. Thank you all so much for listening. God bless you all.